Welcome back. This is Sunday edition. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about the sugar probe, for which a parliamentary committee, the joint committee consisting of the committees of Agriculture and Trade, did present or table a report in Parliament last week, a report that has been criticized heavily, being termed as shallow and inconclusive. Let's listen to our senior political affairs reporter, Duncan Haemba, giving us more details on what happened.
Barely 24 hours after the National Assembly punched holes on the preliminary report by the Joint Committee probing the proliferation of contraband sugar, the committee's co-chair has expressed his disappointment.
Within 10 days, and you have a conclusive report, you can't have it unless you are being set for failure, which personally I read a lot, that we were actually set for failure, and then to be depicted as if we are incompetent, as if we are not capable of doing that, so that this whole question of sugar is suspended and nobody pursues this issue of sugar to the logical conclusion. According
to Kieni Member of Parliament Kanini Kega, there could be more than meets the eye in the whole saga. During the tabling of the report, members of Parliament were furious that the probe had not unmasked the architects of the illegal trade.
There's forces left, right, and center who want to scuttle our investigation because it touches on even some of, as I said, some of the members of Parliament who could also be in this business.
He added that the joint 36-member committee was frustrated from the onset because of forces who wanted to cover up the probe.
If the sugar doesn't have mercury, we now have to pursue the other criminalities, evasion of tax. And if there is any person who evaded tax, they have to pay for it. But you can't demonize us and say that our mandate was just about mercury, and now we don't concentrate on the issue of evasion of tax. And I challenge the majority leader again to declare his interest in this issue. Because at the end of the day, we have to set the matter conclusively. Whether there are some people who are trying to evade tax or not, that one has to be said.
Kwa sababu kama mbunge wengine wanasema ni mbaya, wengine ni nzuri, wanapigana kama jana naona wanapigana karibu mbunge isimame. Tutajulia ukweli wapi? Kwa hivyo nataka kuomba viongozi tafadhali tujiheshimu, tulete ujumbe wa ukweli kwa sababu sisi tunataka kuendelea na maisha yetu ya kawaida.
The Joint Committee has now been tasked to go back and start their probe afresh with input from state agencies. Duncan Haemba, KTN News.
Right. Last week on the show here, we were discussing about whether it is time for that particular issue and many other corruption issues to be investigated by a judicial commission of inquiry rather than use the parliamentary committees. And there was a very heated debate about that. Hesbon Owila did put down very solid recommendations. In fact, the whole team did. It seems those are more solid than what that committee did on the floor of the House this month. What do you think about this report?
Well, you remember during our show last week, we predicted that this committee was going to be a successful failure, and that's what they've demonstrated. Granted, there are a number of MPs have said that this is merely a progress report, that we should expect more. But in the progress report, we expected a lot more, because they were faced with essentially three questions. Number one, whether or not the sugar we are consuming today is contaminated. And the Kanini Kega-led committee did not tell us that. Number two, whether or not the agencies responsible in this business did their work, they didn't tell us anything. Number three, whether or not we needed all this sugar in Kenya, they did not tell us that. And it seems to me that Parliament, if the two speakers are not careful, then the entire nation is going to lose confidence in the National Assembly and in the Senate. Because Kanini Kega says that there are some powerful forces, external forces, that wanted to compromise the outcome of that report. And he says these at the floor of the National Assembly, where members have got parliamentary immunity, that you can say whatever you want to say and nobody is going to prosecute you. Now, the big question is, who are these barons or cartels or special interest groups who make members of the National Assembly so nervous that they cannot mention their names in a place where they've got immunity, at the floor of the House. That's number one. Number two, these 36 members of the National Assembly who are in this committee, were they representing 36 constituencies, or they were representing 36 barons and cartels and special interest groups? Because for me, I assume that when you've been elected to the National Assembly, your principal duty is to present the people who voted for you. If you are maybe a nominated member of the Senate or National Assembly, we can excuse you. We say you are supposed to be loyal to your party leader. But these are 36 people who went through the party primaries. We assume they won. They went to the general election. We assume they won. They are sworn as members of the National Assembly, supposed to be loyal and defend Wanjiko's interests. And they're in the National Assembly, and all they can do is to tiptoe around critical issues. Right now, I don't know whether the sugar that my mom is going to buy in the evening is laced with mercury, lead, or copper, or any other minerals, because this committee did not give us an indication. Yet the Ministry of Health, through a report, says about 60% of the sugar is not supposed to be consumed because of moisture content. Even the speaker had to joke and say that maybe this sugar's got a bit of alcohol. So whom are we supposed to trust in Kenya today if we cannot trust the National Assembly? And they were given 10 days. If you speak to scientists, they'll tell you, if you want to test for mercury or these products, it doesn't take more than a day. So Kanini Kegaya has got the alacrity and guts to say they were set up for failure. If he knew they were set up for failure, why did he consume taxpayers' resources for 10 days to give us a shoddy report? And as you indicated, Owila would have given us that report last week without even spending 10 days collecting per diems. So we go back to the question. Did we need this committee? Now the answer is obviously no. This is the reason why we need a judicial commission. But before you go to a judicial commission, how was this committee able to establish all this without getting independent subject matter experts to give a view? Because you recall, there have been statements of contradiction from Dr. Matiang'i, from Adan Mohamed, from Kiunjuri, from Rotich. Now, the reason why you need a judicial commission, as suggested by Musalia Mudavadi, is to get subject matter experts to come and give us solid advice, to tell us what has really happened. Because right now, you cannot trust the members of this committee to give us an opinion, because the Speaker of the National Assembly has expressed reservations. Mr. Kinoti, the DCIA, has expressed reservations. Their own colleagues within the National Assembly have expressed reservations. So the only person who can deliver us is we have a judicial commission made up of independent subject matter experts. You now need agronomists, chemical engineers, all those guys who are at home with these complicated sciences, to take up the sugar and tell us this sugar is solid. Now, when the Minister of Health says 60% of the sugar is contaminated, and this committee says we have no evidence it's contaminated, what are we supposed to do as Kenyans, taxpayers?
All right. Kipchumba, let me come to you. You seem to have a lot of points. And the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, did make a snide remark about this committee, saying they're trying to get Kenyans the truth through hugs and kisses. Is this enough proof that we should go the Judicial Commission way?
Ben, it is very difficult to disagree with my senior, the Speaker of the National Assembly. Because look at it this way. We, all of us have been here, we have discussed this matter severally. We saw the members of the same committee asking very relevant questions like, what is the percentage of ownership in this company? What has that got to do with sugar? And we have reports in the Attorney General office showing who owns what company. But as to whether we need a judicial commission to inquire into this, I am still a proponent of the same, because look at it this way. We are barely scratching the bottom of the barrel for ideas to even present a document in Parliament. These are people who are after their per diems, after protecting barons, as the chairman has said. The chairman has been given by law privileges and powers to name anybody. They have the same power as an high court to summon anybody, but they are not utilizing those powers. Going back to the matter of the report, the interim report to me is just as clear as the mud. We are now too deep into the problem. We thought the committee will help us get out, but it doesn't. in three areas. One, there is a farmer seated in Matungu who expected, a sugarcane farmer, or really where my good friend comes from, who expected answers from this committee to protect their sugar, to make sure that at least whatever their cash crop is protected in the essence that there is a ready market, and to weed away cartels. That did not come out. We expected to see something towards the millers who are industrialists in this country, the Ryan group. They expected to see this committee deliver a report that will help them make their processes easier.
Right.
A report that will allow them to import the sugar that they cannot raise. We know the capacity of sugar we consume in this country. We needed to know that if today Ben is a sugar miller. If you normally produce in your top line 10,000 metric tons and you could not produce, you produce 8, you are supposed to be allowed expressly to import 2,000 to meet the deficit. 3, there are investors who are supposed to come to this country, the early Dangotes and everything. If they have been watching whatever is happening in this country and they have been waiting for that report to help them, they can't see anything because the report is as shallow as the baby swimming pool somewhere. There is nothing you can take home. Now to the issues that ought to have been raised by the committee.
Okay.
Ordinarily, KEBS cannot be in the entire world to inspect those products coming to Kenya. It has their agents. We have Cotecna, SGV, SGS, Intec, and all these CCIV. All these, we have them. We ought to have seen one of the agents from the Brazil and those in that region appearing before the committee, telling the committee how we developed the certificate of conformity that brought this sugar in. That did not happen. How do you expect to get the truth when you cannot bring in the person who developed the certificate of conformity? Secondly, the committee did not do the basic minimum to even tell us we have 3 types of sugars. We have raw sugar, table sugar, and we have industrial sugar, and how much was imported during this time. The other question that ought to have been answered, where is this sugar?
Okay.
When we say we have 60% of the sugar which is contaminated, where is it? And the last point is this being a committee of parliament, it has the resources. It summoned all the line ministers. We ought to have seen them asking the importers, recall all the sugar, because they know their retail chain. Recall all the sugar, mill it afresh, or destroy it. But when such recommendations are not forthcoming, then we call this as the deepest end parliamentary committee has ever sunk in hugging mediocrity.
Hesbon, the question then would be why? Why were these questions not asked?
Well, Ben, I think the most obvious thing about why the questions were not asked is because there is a sense in which you realize that even this National Assembly is probably held hostage by forces that we don't know. Because you look at the recommendations in this committee, a committee of 36 elected leaders who probably represent millions of Kenyans, saying that there are forces that were out to scuttle the whole process. They enjoy immunity. They are talking on the floor of parliament. Why didn't they mention these forces? And the reason why can only point to a force that is probably a lot more powerful. Then you ask yourself, when this committee talks about unscrupulous traders and goes ahead not to mention even one, then most shockingly, this committee tells us enough things that we know. They tell us that KEBS has agents all over the world who inspect the sugar or any other product that is coming into the country. But they go ahead and say that all the imported sugar were cleared, and they make a recommendation that they observe that the sugar within the country that was imported was actually cleared. Yet, the onus was on them to find out that this sugar that was cleared, and apparently it seems like it was cleared irregularly, who is culpable? You know, making flimsy recommendations like, this contamination might have been due to the processing and stuff like that. I think it's running away from the real issue. Then the most important thing that I think this committee ought to have done is to allay the fears that whatever we are consuming every morning is contaminated with mercury. Because how did this thing end up in the floor of Parliament? It was a public interest thing when Honorable Lesuda Naisula went to Parliament and the Speaker of Parliament picked it up and commissioned these two committees. The issue was mercury, you know. And I think the focus ought to have been in telling us that the sugar that we have every day when we are taking tea either has mercury or does not have mercury, so that we make a decision. But what did they go finding out? That it has too much moisture. I mean, we can eat moisture. I don't think moisture will affect us. But the fact that we still have that fear that there could be mercury that we are consuming is a big, big problem with this committee. They did not address that. But then I think going forward, it's just incumbent upon Parliament to realize that, you know, when we are talking about issues of public interest, they have the authority given to them by the elected leaders. When they are doing something and they have that immunity, and we realize that they are still held hostage, we are left hopeless. And I think this committee ought to realize that if they've been given enough time to go back and do a thorough job, they need to tell us who are these unscrupulous traders, who was responsible for clearing this sugar that got into the market.
All right.
Yes.
Lillian, we're talking about a committee of parliament mandated by Kenyans to look out for them on a very important health issue. I mean, and this is something that is being asked a lot about parliamentary committees here in this country. And a lot of times we compare them to committees in the US or the UK where they do a proper job. What lessons can we learn from the diaspora, maybe? I don't know.
Well, first, I just saw the clip.
Yes.
And this guy comes out and he's making excuses or, you know, he's coming out with the excuses and pretty much they couldn't do their job and come back to Kenyans with a legit, concrete answer, whatever. And I feel like that is in the expense of the common mwananchi because we put them there and we hope that they represent us and represent as well when it comes to things we ingest, like sugar. If it's something that's going to harm you, that is serious. Right. And I feel like the seriousness is not being felt enough. I don't know if I feel it because I'm looking at it from outside, because it scares me. You know, if you woke up one day and you're being told on radio, this sugar might have this, even the remote possibility that could actually be happening and people's health is at risk is scary. So when we're talking here, I'm wondering what kind of conversations are we going to have in the next 5 years? Is everything still going to be the same? Is this a joke? Is it a hoax? What's happening?
So this is a serious issue. Do you think Kenyans are scared enough for such things to be taken with the seriousness they deserve?
I want them to be scared, you know. Our children are drinking this sugar. Everybody's drinking this sugar, you know. And if we're drinking mercury, that's a legit concern.
All right.
So if people are going to talk and make excuses, oh, we couldn't do, that's sad. And you asked me to what we can learn. I think people have to be serious. How did we get here in the first place? I think that's also a legit question because we are importing sugar now. We never used to do that. We used to have our own sugar that we're making at home, good sugar.
All right.
You know. So what happened to Nzoia Sugar Factory? What happened to all of them? What happened to Mumias, Muhoroni, Sony? We should go back to the basics. All Maybe that is how we need to solve our problems.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, very, very good questions. Dismas, the committee has been given 10 days to come up with a more conclusive report. How are they going to do that? Or what do we do? Where do we go from here?
You see, there's a saying that siku njema huonekana asubuhi. So from their preliminary reports or their interim reports, if we expect them to come up with a solid report, then we'll be expecting miracles. From where I've seated, and I've had the chance of having conversations with a number of members of that committee, asking them, what should we expect from you? And all we are told is that the sugar in the supermarkets and shops is good for your consumption. But you see, we don't want to be given those kind of statements. We want statements made on the basis of science. We don't just want somebody to give us a blanket statement that go ahead, you can consume as much sugar as you want. We want statements anchored by empirical evidence and research. So at this stage, if you're expecting a solid report that would shock the world, then don't hold your breath. And the way forward would be for President Kenyatta to come forward and respond to the people's pressure, form a judicial commission of inquiry, so that you get a judge, you get subject matter experts to go through these once and for all. You even recall 2015, we had a committee of the National Assembly which investigated this sugar case, and they came up with a number of conclusions that the millers we have today are using outdated technology, there are inefficiencies, the cost of production is very high. That's why the sugar in Kenya is very expensive. Now, if you get a judicial commission, then they'll be able to get subject matter experts and really point us in the direction where we are supposed to be. Like, for instance, we know for a fact that Rotich gave out a waiver. He said you can import as much sugar as you can over a duration of 4 months. Now, the question is, when he was doing this, who did he consult? Did he consult stakeholders, or did he just consult his colleague cabinet ministers and come up with the decision? Because by the time he was giving that waiver for people to import sugar, he knew how much deficit Kenya was having. So say if the deficit was 200,000 tons, why would he allow us just to import as much sugar as we want and flood the market? And depending on who you speak with, they say, right now we have sugars to run us for 3 years or 6 years, depending on whom you speak with. So why would the cabinet secretary in charge of the national treasury come up with a decision which allows us to get sugar to suffocate the local sugarcane farmers in Kenya? And understand there are about 8 million livelihoods affected by this decision in Luo Nyanza in Western Kenya. And those are the people that are committing suicide today. They took a loan. The relationship manager is calling them every day saying, I need this money back. If you don't have the resources, so some guys are opting to commit suicide. The brave ones are using that sugarcane for firewood. Those are the ones who have guts. But the others who've decided to do away with the sugar. And then how come we have not privatized the mills that the lady's talking about? And we know for a fact that would be the solution. You've got about 10 sugar factories with rodents running supreme, and yet here in Nairobi we are saying we have got leaders who care for the nation. And increasingly it's becoming very clear that actually the problem in Kenya is the politicians. So politicians create the problem, and then they purport to give us the solution. Instead of giving us the solution, they are beneficiaries of the same problem. Like, understand a number of those MPs, all of them now have been going with per diem because they counted they were having 2 sessions every day. So for the poor sugarcane farmer in Kisii or in Muhoroni who cannot afford to buy Panadol this morning, their MP has been collecting an average of 10,000 shillings a day. Understand that's the amount of money they are paid. So who is going to save Kenya if not our elected representatives?
And that is the main, at the end of the day, that is where the discussion will have to go. Kenya is too deep into this. Parliament has to help Kenyans get to the bottom of this. Treasury have to answer their questions. But at the end of the day, the sugar belt, what is the solution going forward? Very quickly, Chumba.
The solution...
How do we get the farmers to want to grow cane again? And how do we make sure the factories are running efficiently?
I think we cannot, as somebody said, you cannot do the same thing twice expecting different results, and unless we are practicing madness and witchcraft, which we are not about to delve into. The thinking in this country, at times I think we have menopause thinking going on in those policymakers. Look at it this way, we have a shortage of sugar, 50% shortage. Not that we have shortage of land or cane, we have shortage of sugar, and we have cane everywhere. My constituency, cane farming has now been introduced 3 years ago. Tarbo constituency is now a cane farming region. We have Butali as a sugar milling factory there. What we need to do is to develop sound policy. First, let us privatize all these government-owned sugar companies so that the government is not, there is no conflict of interest. You know, here, government is doing business, government is the regulator. Government should just stick in regulating the industry and make sure that there is fair play. And we have competition authority, we have the Kenya Sugar Board Directorate, all those should stick to that purpose. Secondly, let us make sure that we have, how comes Swaziland beats us in manufacturing cheap sugar? Tanzania beats us in manufacturing cheap sugar. Zimbabwe beats us because of the old way of doing things. Why should cane take 24 months to mature in Kenya while it is taking 8 months elsewhere? Those are the things we need to work towards. Secondly, why should we allow anybody and everybody who has money, idle money, to import sugar? That is why we end up with this contamination. Let us allow, in case of any shortage, let us allow millers to import sugar. But even before we go to importing sugar, we need to ask ourselves as a country, do we have other things we can do before importing? The same sugar issue. Why should we allow, and we know, we have intelligence report that the porous border is allowing people who are doing tax evasion to bring sugar which has not been standardized to come into the region? Yes, the border might be 700 kilometers. Why don't we have a border, a one-stop point, border point, along the porous Somali-Kenya border to take into consideration this? And in conclusion, I think, and I'm guided in this thinking, that Parliament as it is, the committee cannot come up with anything tangible. We will be back to name calling. You remember, the only thing this committee is remembered for is for bringing in the name of Muhoho Kenyatta. We ought to have been told now that they brought in the name of Muhoho Kenyatta, these are the people who imported sugar, these are the people who did not import sugar, so that we do not misuse the parliamentary privilege to fighting political battles and mudslinging.
All right. Husband, is there anything that can be done to have your village mates, benefit from the sugar they grow, and rightly so?
Yes. Ben, I think there is a lot that can be done, but I'll stick to 3 things. One, I think the members of Parliament need to be bold enough to point out the people who are interfering with the entire industry and making farmers suffer. And the 10 days that they've been given, they actually have a way of redeeming themselves by doing what they ought to be doing. Then number 2, I think there's the sugar development levy, which was an amount that the government was collecting to plow back to the farmers, because a capacitated farmer is likely to be a lot more productive. I don't think in this country, when we talk about sugar, we should be talking about trade. We should actually be talking about sugar within the wrappings of agriculture, not trade, because it is trade that is bringing all these things. Then number 3, I think it's also incumbent upon the government to ensure that the government-owned millers are given the necessary capacity to process any sugar cane from these farmers. And then lastly, I think zoning needs to come back. I mean, the idea of having unscrupulous traders get into the milling industry and poaching sugar from zones that they didn't invest in should be a thing of the past.
I think that point has been coming out very strongly. That Committee of Parliament should adopt it.
Yes.
Very quickly, Lillian, what do you think we should do to get the Nzoias and the Muhoronis back to business?
I grew up with girls who went to school because of sugarcane. Their folks paid school fees through university. And I'm thinking, some of these people don't do this anymore because obviously the industry is suffering. They might opt to do corn or something else, and that means no sugarcane farmers. The same thing happened with some of our tea farmers. So I feel like we have to go back to the basics again.
Right.
I do agree with him. He said something about privatization because obviously the government has too much going on. Maybe sugar is not such a priority, but now we are here talking about bad sugar.
Yes.
I feel like we should also invest in our youth. We have so much brain power in this country that's not being tapped. There's so many smart people out here who are very able to run such great industries and bring us back. And it's sad because even talking about the SGR thing where we're importing labor, what's happening to all, cheap labor? All our graduates from all these universities we have here. So I think we have to go back and look into our youth and have faith in them and give them jobs and, bring these industries back.
All right.
Yeah.
This was in a nutshell, very quickly. 2 solutions.
The solution is very clear, and the only person who can trigger that solution is President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. The buck stops with him. All the sugarcane farmers in Kenya expect him to offer solutions, and for him to offer the solution, he needs to be guided by an independent commission. So I don't know. Actually, I don't understand why the president has not yet appointed a judicial commission of inquiry for several reasons, to sanitize the entire sector, and in the process, it will actually get him out of the mess created by those MPs who succeeded in engaging in character assassination. Because you recall his brother was mentioned as one of the key players. Now, when you have this kind of judicial commission, then it will give us facts and figures. Because you see, this committee succeeded in just in character assassination, and nothing more apart from character assassination. For instance, when the speaker gave them the mandate to go and begin the investigations, he did not tell them, go give me names of family and friends who participated in this. He told them, go and establish whether or not this sugar has got mercury, has got copper, has got lead, and other heavy minerals. But what did they do? They were they were on a fishing expedition looking for names that may give them prominence. Like, for instance, Simba Arati is a member of that committee. What were his questions? Asking Dr. Matiang'i, are you fighting the deputy president? Do you have a conflict of interest? Well, my villagers in Mosocho want to know, is the sugar we are consuming, is it safe? So a judicial commission of inquiry with retired judges, very solid people that Karuri refers to as his seniors, are the only ones who will save us. And then for the first time, in as much as, again, we say that these reports are never implemented, then the president needs to implement. Because if he doesn't form these, he's doing a disservice to 8 million Kenyans who depend on sugar.
Harsh indictments on that joint committee of the National Assembly, the Trade and Agriculture Committees, co-chaired by Kanini Kega and Aden Ali. We shall wait to see, after the 10 days they have been given by the Speaker, to come up with a more conclusive report, what will be coming out of that. But not much answers getting to Kenyans over the sugar probe, continuing that debate over whether or not to have the departmental committees investigate this or, come up or form judicial commissions of inquiry. Let's take another quick commercial break here on Sunday edition. When we come back, we'll be switching gears and talking about the war on corruption. We have seen a lot of activity from the Director of Public Prosecution's office, many orders coming through, arrests being made, even one of a sitting governor, the Busia governor. Does this action or movement mean there's a lot happening in the war on corruption, or is it just movement without any sort of direction? We'll talk about all that, and also the judiciary's role in this war on corruption. Don't go too far.
Wale ambao wako na wasiwasi ya kwamba mbona tunashirikiana, wawache makelele na siasa ya bure. Na kazi ya naibu ya rais ndio hii mimi nafanya. Mimi si mpishi, mimi si watchman, mimi siuzi makaa, mimi siuzi nyama. Mimi ni mtu wa kupanga mambo ya maendeleo ya Kenya nikishirikiana na rais.